The autumn wind carried the scent of overripe apples across the overgrown fields as Thea Calloway stood at the edge of what used to be Meadowbrook Farm's main driveway. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the auction paddle number 17, while her savings account balance played on repeat in her mind. $29,000. 5 years of scrimping after Owen's heart attack had left her with 2 children, a pile of medical debt, and the kind of exhaustion that settled into bones and refused to leave. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the patchy lawn where perhaps 50 people had gathered, most of them locals drawn by curiosity rather than genuine interest. The farmhouse sagged under layers of peeling paint, its wraparound porch tilting at an angle that suggested surrender. 115 acres of neglected land stretched toward the tree line, and somewhere in that tangle of brambles and volunteer saplings was the orchard that had first caught her attention in the listing photos. The barn's roof had partially collapsed on the north side, exposing skeletal rafters to the elements. Kieran shifted beside her, 14 years old and trying to appear indifferent, though she'd caught him studying the property with something that might have been hope. Bryn clutched a smooth stone in her pocket, the lucky charm she'd carried since 2nd grade, her knuckles white with the effort of believing. The auctioneer cleared his throat as the crowd settled. Opening bid $75,000 for the complete property, sold as is, cash or pre-approved financing, only 10% down today, closing in 30 days. A murmur ran through the assembly. The bank had valued this place at nearly $400,000 in better times, but 3 years of abandonment and a rural market that couldn't sustain family farms anymore had transformed it into something people whispered about rather than invested in. Thea raised her paddle before doubt could stop her. $78,000. The auctioneer's gaze found her a flicker of surprise crossing his weathered face. A woman she didn't recognize. Silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, expensive wool coat despite the mild temperature, raised her paddle without hesitation. $85,000. The number hit like a physical blow. Thea's pre-approval from the credit union topped out at $92,000, and even that required her to scrape together every cent she'd managed to save from double shifts at Maeve's Diner and weekend house cleaning jobs. She raised her paddle again. $90,000. Her voice felt thick in her throat, though she hadn't spoken aloud. A man in a crisp button-down emerged from a black SUV that had arrived late, checking his phone as he approached the registration table. Something about his practiced efficiency suggested this was routine for him. He collected his paddle and surveyed the property with the detached assessment of someone calculating demolition costs. The silver-haired woman bid $95,000 as if the number meant nothing. Thea's hand stayed down. She couldn't go higher. The man in the button-down raised his paddle. $100,000. Westridge Development, according to the logo on his portfolio. The silver-haired woman's response came without pause. $145,000. The Westridge representative consulted briefly with a colleague who'd joined him, then shook his head at the auctioneer. The crowd's murmur intensified. That kind of money for this wreck made no sense, unless you knew something everyone else didn't. Going once, going twice. The gavel cracked down with finality. Sold to bidder number 8 for $145,000. Thea felt Bryn's small hand slip into hers as the auction broke up. People clustered in small groups speculating about who had that kind of money to throw at a lost cause. She should collect her children and drive back to their cramped apartment above the dry cleaners, should start searching listings again for anything within reach. Instead, she found herself walking toward the silver-haired woman who was speaking with the auction company's closing coordinator. "Congratulations." The word came out steadier than Thea felt. The woman turned, and up close her eyes were a pale gray that seemed to catalog everything in a single glance. "You're Thea Calloway, waitress at Maeve's Diner. 2 children. Interested in heritage farming despite having no formal agricultural training beyond childhood summers at your grandfather's orchard in Michigan." The accuracy of the assessment sent a chill down Thea's spine. "How do you know all that?" The woman's expression remained neutral. "I research potential competitors before I bid on properties. Small towns make information easy to gather. I'm Adelaide Westbrook." Thea absorbed this, aware that Kieran and Bryn had moved closer, protective in their curiosity. I'm hardly competition. Adelaide's gaze shifted to the children, then back to Thea. No, you're not. Which makes me curious why you bid at all. Why use your last savings on something this far beyond your means? The bluntness should have been offensive, but Thea recognized it as simple assessment. My grandfather grew apples in Michigan. Best memories of my childhood were harvest seasons with him. When my husband died, I promised myself I'd give my kids something more than just getting by. This place, despite everything wrong with it, felt like possibility. Adelaide studied her for a long moment. Sentiment is charming, Ms. Calloway, but insufficient for managing 115 acres of neglected farmland. She turned back to the coordinator, clearly dismissing the conversation. Thea gathered Kieran and Bryn and walked back toward their car past clusters of departing vehicles and the Westridge development team packing up their presentation materials. The property she'd imagined transforming would belong to someone else. The fresh start she'd almost believed possible remained out of reach. 3 days later, Adelaide Westbrook appeared at their apartment door with a manila folder under one arm and an expression that suggested she didn't waste time on pleasantries. "May I come in?" She didn't wait for an answer, stepping into the small living room where Kieran's homework covered half the table and Bryn's art supplies claimed the rest. "I have a proposition, Ms. Calloway." Adelaide settled into the chair Thea indicated, placing the folder precisely in front of her. "I've spent the past 72 hours reviewing your financial history, employment record, and personal background. Your credit is damaged, but not destroyed. Your work ethic appears solid. Your children seem well adjusted despite difficult circumstances." Thea felt her jaw tighten. "That's invasive." Adelaide's gaze didn't waver. "That's thorough. I don't invest in people I haven't researched. The Meadowbrook property represents a significant commitment from my preservation trust. I need to know if you're capable of managing it." Managing it. Thea's confusion must have shown because Adelaide opened the folder and slid a document across the table. 5-year lease with option to purchase. My trust provides $45,000 for essential repairs and equipment. You pay $400 monthly rent beginning month 7, which gives you 6 months to establish operations. If after 5 years the farm proves profitable and you've maintained the heritage elements, you have the option to purchase the property at fair market value minus the improvements you've made. The words seemed to rearrange themselves as Thea read through the contract. "This isn't charity, Ms. Calloway." Adelaide's voice cut through her racing thoughts. "This is investment in someone who might succeed where others would fail. You'll submit quarterly reports on operations and finances. You'll focus on heritage agriculture, not commodity farming. You'll preserve the historical structures and agricultural legacy of Nathaniel Thornfield, who established this farm in 1886. Thea looked up from the document. "Why me?" "You don't know me. I have no farming experience beyond childhood memories and research I've done in the past 6 months. Adelaide's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Because when you looked at that wreck of a farm, you saw possibility where everyone else saw problems. That kind of vision matters. But vision without execution means nothing. Prove you can execute." The apartment suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in with the weight of decision. Kieran had stopped pretending to do homework. Bryn had abandoned her colored pencils. "What if I fail?" The question escaped before Thea could stop it. Adelaide stood, leaving the folder on the table. "Then you fail, and we both move on. But I've learned to recognize the difference between people who dream and people who build. You strike me as a builder, Ms. Calloway. Don't prove me wrong." After Adelaide left, Thea sat with the contract while her children waited. The smart choice was obvious. Accept the offer. Take the opportunity. Stop overthinking. But smart choices and right choices didn't always align, and the gap between them felt like a canyon she couldn't measure. Kieran broke the silence first, his voice careful. "Dad would have wanted you to try." That night, Thea called the number on Adelaide's business card and left a message. 3 words. "I accept. Terms as written." They moved to Meadowbrook Farm on a gray November morning when frost still clung to the long grass. The cottage that would serve as their home while they worked on the main house was smaller than their apartment, with questionable wiring and plumbing that groaned when you turned on the shower. But it had a wood stove that actually worked, and windows that looked out over fields instead of the dry cleaner's parking lot. Bryn cried the first night, muffled sobs that she tried to hide under her blanket. Too quiet, too dark, too different from everything she'd known. Kieran maintained a careful neutrality that Thea recognized as protection against disappointment. If he didn't hope too hard, the inevitable failure wouldn't hurt as much. Sullivan Porter, the caretaker, Adelaide had hired years ago to prevent complete collapse, appeared at the cottage door the next morning with a thermos of coffee and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen plenty of city people try their hand at farming. "Call me Sully." He handed her the coffee without ceremony. "Adelaide says you're serious about this place. Most people who say that don't last through the first winter." Thea accepted the coffee, grateful for the warmth. "I'm not most people." Sully's expression suggested he'd heard that before too, but he nodded toward the main house. "Best start with a proper survey. Know what you're working with before you make plans." The main house revealed itself in layers of decay and stubborn endurance. Plaster had fallen from walls in several rooms, exposing lath beneath. The kitchen had been stripped of appliances at some point, leaving only the ghost marks of what had been. But the bones were solid hand-hewn beams, wide plank floors worn smooth by generations of footsteps, built-in cabinets that showed the craftsmanship of someone who took pride in their work. In what had once been a parlor, Thea noticed the floorboards near the massive stone fireplace followed a different grain pattern than the rest of the room. Sully followed her gaze. "That's been there as long as I've known this place. Could be a repair, could be something else." Old Nathaniel Thornfield was known for not trusting banks. The basement stairs creaked under their weight, and Sully's flashlight carved through shadows that seemed decades thick. The foundation was fieldstone mortared by hands that understood the relationship between rock and earth. One section of the east wall caught Thea's attention. The stones were more uniform, more deliberately placed than the surrounding masonry. 3 days later, Adelaide arrived with a rolled document under her arm. Original blueprints from the county archives. She spread them across the cottage's kitchen table, revealing detailed architectural drawings dated 1886, the ink faded but still legible. Nathaniel Thornfield's hand had been meticulous. Every room, every outbuilding, every fence line marked with precision. Kieran leaned over Thea's shoulder, tracing the lines with one finger. "What's this notation?" He pointed to a small mark near the foundation level of the main house. "Secure storage." The words were barely visible in the margin. Adelaide's interest sharpened. Sully mentioned rumors about Nathaniel hiding valuables. Most people who've looked over the years found nothing. Probably just legend. But if you're going to restore the place anyway, might be worth investigating. The search took 2 weeks of careful exploration, moving through the basement in grid patterns, testing walls and floors. Bryn found the iron ring first embedded in a flat stone near the base of that uniform section of wall. She'd been drawing the basement's stone patterns for an art project, and noticed how the ring's placement created an asymmetry that bothered her artistic sense. Thea knelt beside her daughter, brushing away decades of accumulated dust. The ring was small, easily missed unless you were looking. She gripped it and pulled. The stone resisted, then grudgingly slid forward. Behind it, an iron lever waited. Kieran and Sully were upstairs doing an inventory of the barn when Thea called them down. The 4 of them stood in the dim basement staring at the lever. Sully whistled low. "Counterweight system, I'd guess. Connected to something in the wall. You want to pull it, or should I?" Thea's hand closed around the cold metal. The lever moved slowly, fighting rust and time. A grinding sound echoed from within the wall, and then a section of stones about 3 feet square shifted inward and slid to the side. Behind the stones, recessed into a cavity carved from the foundation, sat a cast-iron safe. The nameplate read Thornfield in ornate script. The dial showed numbers from 0 to 50. Sully examined it carefully. Champion model 1880s. Good craftsmanship. Combination lock. He looked at Thea. You could call a locksmith, but those old mechanisms can be temperamental. Might damage whatever's inside if you force it. Kieran had grabbed the blueprints from upstairs. He spread them on the basement floor, studying the margins under flashlight. There are numbers here. Faint, but look 1842-7. Worth trying. Thea knelt before the safe, her fingers finding the dial. Right to 18, left to 42, right to 7. The mechanism refused to budge. She tried again, slower, with more pressure. Nothing. What if they're backward? Kieran's voice held careful hope. Try 742-18. The dial turned smoothly under her touch this time. 7, 42, 18. A click sounded from deep within the lock. Thea gripped the handle and pulled. The door resisted for a heartbeat, then groaned open on hinges that hadn't moved in decades. Inside, the safe held no gold bars or jeweled treasures. Instead, leather-bound journals sat stacked neatly on one shelf. Ledgers occupied another. Bundles of letters tied with ribbon that had faded to gray filled a third. A wooden box carved with intricate patterns rested on the bottom. Beside it, a cloth bag clinked softly when Sully lifted it. The bag held gold coins, their surfaces dulled by time but unmistakably valuable. Thea counted them twice. 43 coins, mostly $20 gold pieces from the late 1800s. Not a fortune, but enough to matter. Perhaps $3,000 worth at collector prices. The wooden box revealed Nathaniel Thornfield's personal journal, his initials embossed on the leather cover. Thea opened it carefully. The first entry was dated March 15, 1886. Today I took possession of 115 acres that will either prove my salvation or my ruin. The land is raw, untested, as am I. She skipped to the last pages where Nathaniel's handwriting had grown shakier but remained legible. The final entry was dated weeks before his death in 1924. To whoever finds this vault. These seeds and grafts represent 40 years of work developing apple varieties suited to this land. The North Orchard contains my life's achievement, 5 unique varieties combining flavor, hardiness, and character found nowhere else. Guard them. Nurture them. They are Meadowbrook's true treasure, not the modest gold left here for emergencies. May this farm endure beyond my lifetime. Bryn touched the seed packets with reverence. What if the trees are dead? Her voice was small in the basement's shadows. Thea gathered the journals and packets carefully. Then we plant new ones from these seeds. But we should check the North Orchard first. Nathaniel wouldn't have hidden these if they weren't important. The North Orchard revealed itself slowly through December's early snow. 60 trees stood in 5 distinct groups, ancient and gnarled, strangled by decades of volunteer growth and neglect. But when Sully cut into the bark of the largest specimen, green cambium showed beneath. Alive. Dormant, but alive. Adelaide arranged for Dr. Patricia Oakes, a pomologist from the State University, to assess the trees in late December. Dr. Oakes moved through the orchard with careful precision, taking samples, photographing bark patterns, cataloging the tree's arrangement. She looked up from her notes as snow began to fall again. These are old genetics. I'll need DNA analysis to confirm, but the structure suggests deliberate breeding work. If Nathaniel Thornfield was developing unique varieties, some of these trees could be his original stock. How long before they produce? Thea pulled her coat tighter against the wind. Doctor, Oakes considered the question. They're severely stressed from neglect. With proper pruning, pest treatment, and soil amendment, you might see limited production in 2 years. Full production, 3 to 4 years. The DNA analysis will tell us if they're worth the investment. The cost estimate arrived a week later. $8,000 for comprehensive restoration, pruning, treatment, soil work. Within Adelaide's funding, but it would consume most of what remained after winterizing the cottage and purchasing basic equipment. Thea spread the numbers across the kitchen table while Kieran and Bryn watched. We can do it. Her voice sounded more confident than she felt. Adelaide's trust provides the capital. We provide the labor. What if it doesn't work? Kieran's skepticism had worn thin over the past month, revealing the fear beneath. What if we spend everything and the trees die anyway? The question deserved honesty. Then we'll have tried and failed. But if we don't try, we fail anyway. At least this way we know. January brought the kind of cold that made bones ache, but it also brought volunteers. Maeve O'Sullivan rallied her diner regulars for a pruning party, and 12 people showed up with chainsaws and brush cutters to help clear the orchard. Sully directed the work with patient authority, teaching proper pruning technique while they labored. Kieran took charge of one section, his initial reluctance transforming into methodical focus. Bryn created an illustrated map of the orchard, her artistic eye capturing details that purely functional maps would miss. By the end of the weekend, the ancient trees stood free of their competitors, properly pruned for the first time in decades. A late January ice storm reminded them that farming meant accepting what you couldn't control. 8 trees sustained damage beyond saving their branches snapping under the weight of accumulated ice. Thea stood in the orchard the morning after surveying the destruction with a hollow feeling in her chest. Sully appeared beside her, his breath visible in the cold air. 60 trees lost 8. That's farming. You can't save everything, but you can save most. Adelaide visited that afternoon, assessed the damage, and transferred an additional $2,000 into the farm account for replacement trees when spring comes. But Thea, I expect repayment. This isn't charity. The distinction mattered more than the money. I wouldn't accept it if it were. Thea met Adelaide's pale gray eyes without flinching. I'm building a business, not accepting handouts. Something that might have been approval flickered across Adelaide's expression. Good. Keep that attitude. February arrived with DNA results that transformed possibility into potential. Dr. Oakes spread the analysis across the cottage table with barely contained excitement. All 5 variety groups are genetically distinct, not in any database I can access. If these are Nathaniel Thornfield's original breeding stock, you're looking at heritage genetics that could command premium prices. She pulled out market research. Commercial apples sell for $1.50 per pound wholesale. Heritage varieties with provenance and unique characteristics can command $4 to $6 per pound at farmers markets and specialty stores. If you can establish authenticity and quality, you're looking at significant revenue potential. The preliminary projections made Thea's head spin. Year 3, assuming successful restoration and moderate yields, $35,000. Year 5, $75,000 if they developed a cidery operation. But first you need a business plan. Adelaide's voice cut through the optimism. Numbers on paper don't mean anything without execution. I want a comprehensive business plan by April 1st. Marketing strategy, production timeline, financial projections, risk assessment. Prove you can think like a business person, not just a farmer. The deadline felt impossibly close. I'm not a business person. Adelaide's expression hardened. Then learn. I did. You have internet access, the public library, the agricultural extension office. If you want this farm to succeed, you'll figure it out. March disappeared into a blur of late nights and early mornings. Thea worked through small business administration resources online, attended workshops at the extension office, talked to other small farm operators about their business models. Kieran proved unexpectedly skilled with spreadsheets, his facility with computers exceeding hers. Bryn designed logo concepts, her artistic sensibility translating into clean, appealing visuals. The business plan took shape in phases. Year 1 and 2, Restore Orchard developed small-scale production through vegetables, eggs, and preserves. Year 3, First Heritage Apple Harvest expanded farmers' market presence. Year 4 and 5, convert portion of barn to small cidery, add tasting room. Year 6 and beyond, agritourism, U-Pick operations, educational programming. Revenue projections stayed conservative. Employment limited to family plus seasonal workers. Capital requirements mapped to Adelaide's funding timeline. Risk factors acknowledged honestly. Weather markets, equipment failure, injury. April 1st dawned clear and cold. Thea drove to Adelaide's office in town with the business plan in a folder that felt both too heavy and too light. Adelaide read it in silence for 30 minutes while Thea waited, her stomach twisted into knots. Finally, Adelaide looked up. This is solid work. Realistic projections, reasonable timeline, honest risk assessment. You've thought beyond the romantic notion of farming to actual business operations. She paused. However, Thea's heart sank. However, you're undervaluing your marketing advantage. Adelaide tapped the heritage apple section. People don't just buy produce. They buy story, authenticity, connection to something larger than themselves. Nathaniel Thornfield's legacy, the rediscovered varieties, the farm's survival, that's compelling narrative. Revise your premium pricing upward by 15%. Don't undersell yourself. Relief flooded through Thea. I can do that. Adelaide pulled a folder from her desk. I'm also approving an additional $15,000 for barn conversion to start cidery development in year 3. Conditional on your performance in years 1 and 2, meeting or exceeding projections. April and May transformed the landscape. The orchard bloomed in a spectacular display of white and pink blossoms more vigorous than anyone had expected after the winter's restoration work. Thea walked through that living artwork and felt something she hadn't experienced since before Owen died, a sense of rightness that went deeper than circumstances. First spring harvest brought vegetables, herbs, and eggs to the farmer's market. Modest sales, $400 the first day, but it represented earned income from work they'd done. Bryn's illustrated cards, watercolors of farm scenes with hand-lettered descriptions, sold for $5 each. 40 cards the first weekend. Kieran manned the vegetable stand with growing confidence, his initial resistance to farm work transforming into genuine engagement. Customers responded to his enthusiasm, to the story of Nathaniel Thornfield's legacy, to the promise of heritage apples coming in future seasons. Community acceptance grew slowly but steadily. The Callaways might actually make it. The whispered assessment carried more weight than any formal endorsement. Late May brought Garrett Ashford back into their lives. His vehicle pulled up the farm's driveway on a Tuesday afternoon, and he emerged with the practiced efficiency Thea remembered from the auction. "Ms. Callaway," he extended a hand. "Garrett Ashford, Westridge Development. We met briefly at the auction." Thea accepted the handshake warily. "What can I do for you, Mr. Ashford?" He surveyed the property with an appraising eye. "I wanted to see what you've accomplished. Adelaide Westbrook has an impressive track record with preservation projects." He pulled a folder from his portfolio. "I also wanted to make you an offer. $175,000 cash, immediate closing." The number hung in the air between them. "That's generous." Thea kept her voice neutral. He smiled, professional and friendly. "It is. And it's also realistic, Ms. Callaway. You're doing good work here, I can see that. But let's be honest about the challenges ahead. One bad growing season, one equipment failure, one injury. Any of those could derail everything you're building. This offer provides security for you and your children." What would Westridge do with the property? Garrett didn't hesitate. Residential development, 40 to 50 homes on the acreage. We'd preserve the main house as a community clubhouse. The Thornfield name would be incorporated into the development branding. And the orchard, Thea already knew the answer. Some specimen trees would be maintained for aesthetic purposes. The rest would be cleared to optimize the development footprint. The honesty was almost worse than deception would have been. Thea looked past him to where Kieran was working in the vegetable garden and Bryn was sketching at the cottage porch. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Ashford, but Meadowbrook isn't for sale." He nodded as if he'd expected the response. "I understand. The offer stands if you change your mind. But Miss Callaway, I should mention that Westridge is moving forward with development plans in this area regardless. We've secured options on several surrounding properties. Your farm will be surrounded by construction within 18 months. That will impact your operations significantly. Water table, traffic noise. Something to consider." The implicit threat was clear enough. After Garrett left, Thea called Adelaide. "Westridge is planning to surround us." Adelaide's response came without hesitation. "Then we build something worth preserving even when surrounded. Keep working." That evening, Thea sat at the kitchen table with Nathaniel's journal while Kieran and Bryn slept. She'd been reading it in small doses, finding wisdom in the daily observations of a man who'd faced his own challenges a century before. One entry from April 1893 seemed to speak across the decades. Received another offer today from the railroad company. Their terms grow more generous with each rejection. They promise fair compensation, smooth transitions, opportunities elsewhere. What they cannot promise, because they do not understand it, is the right to tend living things toward their potential rather than exploit them for immediate profit. I decline again. Some things cannot be purchased at any price. The parallel to her own situation wasn't lost on Thea. Nathaniel had faced pressure to sell, had received increasingly generous offers, had recognized the implicit threats beneath professional courtesy. He'd chosen to stay. But Nathaniel hadn't been a widow with 2 children depending on his decisions. He hadn't been rebuilding a life from wreckage. The weight of responsibility felt heavier at 3 in the morning than it did in daylight. Kieran found her there when he woke early to help with farm chores. His voice was quiet in the pre-dawn kitchen. "You're thinking about selling." It wasn't a question. Thea looked at her son, 14 years old, and already carrying burdens no teenager should have to shoulder. The smart choice might be to take Garrett's money. $175,000 would secure your college education, give us stability, eliminate financial anxiety. "What do you want, Mom?" Kieran sat across from her. "Not what's safe or smart. What do you actually want?" The question cut through every practical consideration. "I want this. I want to finish what Nathaniel started. I want you and Bryn to learn what it means to build something that matters more than just getting by. Then tell him no." Kieran's certainty was steadying. We didn't come this far to quit because it got complicated. Morning brought clarity that night had obscured. Thea called Garrett's number and delivered her decision in 3 sentences. "Thank you for the offer. Meadowbrook isn't for sale at any price. Please don't contact me about this again." His response was professional. "I understand, Ms. Calloway, but you should know Westridge Development will proceed with our plans for this region. We have a responsibility to our investors and to the community members who need housing and economic development. I hope we can coexist peacefully." June 1st marked the first quarterly report to Adelaide. Farm status. Orchard recovering ahead of schedule. Farmers market generating $2,000 monthly in supplemental income. Cottage fully winterized and functional main house assessment complete with renovation timeline established. Family status. Kieran and Bryn adjusted, engaged, thriving in ways that transcended their cramped apartment existence. Threat assessment. Westridge Development moving forward with surrounding land acquisition. Potential impacts on water resources, property access, operational environment, but also community support solidifying heritage. Apple authentication complete business plan, approved and funded. Adelaide reviewed the report in person, walking through the orchard with Thea on a warm afternoon when the trees showed healthy leaf growth and the beginning of fruit set. "You've exceeded my expectations." Her tone carried something that might have been pride. "Most people I partner with struggle through year 1. You're actually building momentum." Thea watched Sully in the distance teaching Kieran proper grafting technique. "I had good teachers and determined children." Adelaide's gaze followed hers. "You had vision and work ethic. The rest is just execution." She turned to face Thea directly. "Garrett Ashford called me last week, asked if I'd be willing to sell the property to Westridge for twice what I paid. I told him the property had already been committed to preservation purposes." "Thank you." Adelaide waved off the gratitude. "I didn't do it for you. I did it because turning productive farmland into suburban developments is how we lose agricultural capacity as a nation. Your success here matters beyond just your family." That evening, Thea walked through the orchard alone as sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. The trees that had seemed like desperate gambles 6 months ago now stood as evidence of what careful attention could accomplish. Not saved yet, not secure, but alive, and bearing the first promise of harvest. She opened Nathaniel's journal to an entry from May 1887. 1 year in. The land tests me daily with frost drought pests and my own ignorance. But each tree that takes root, each blossom that appears confirms something I barely dared believe when I started. I made the right choice. Not the easy choice, not the safe choice, but the right one. Thea closed the journal and whispered into the evening air, "I hope I'm making the right choice too, Nathaniel." The orchard offered no answer except the rustle of leaves in the breeze and the distant sounds of Kieran and Bryn laughing at some shared joke in the cottage. Behind her, survey stakes had appeared on the neighboring property where Westridge had secured options. Development was coming whether she liked it or not. But so was harvest and growth, and the slow accumulation of evidence that what they were building here could endure. The forgotten orchard was being remembered one careful choice at a time. Summer heat arrived early in Mapleton County, the kind that made asphalt shimmer and turned the cottage into an oven by mid-afternoon. Thea tracked her finances with the precision of someone who understood that $100 could mean the difference between stability and crisis. July 1st loomed on the calendar, her first payment to Adelaide. $400 that would prove whether this entire venture was sustainable or simply delayed failure. The farmers' market had become their financial lifeline. Weekend mornings meant loading produce into the truck before dawn, setting up the booth, while other vendors arranged their displays, and spending 8 hours selling vegetables, eggs, and Bryn's watercolor cards to customers who were beginning to recognize the Meadowbrook name. June's total revenue had reached $2,200, better than projected, but still leaving little margin for error. Thea's income from the diner added $1,800 monthly. Living expenses consumed $2,100. Farm operations, another $500. The mathematics left $800 monthly breathing room, enough to cover the payment to Adelaide, with $400 remaining for emergencies or unexpected costs. She wrote the check on June 30th and drove to Adelaide's office the next morning. Adelaide accepted it without ceremony, noting the date in her ledger. On time. Most first-year farmers struggle with that initial payment. Thea felt the knot in her chest loosen slightly. "I don't intend to struggle with it." Adelaide's pale gray eyes assessed her. "Good. Consistency matters more than grand gestures in this business." The heat wave that settled over the county in mid-July tested that consistency. Temperatures climbed into the high 90s day after day, and the drought that meteorologists had warned about became undeniable reality. The irrigation system Sully had cobbled together from salvaged parts couldn't keep pace with evaporation rates. Water costs spiked as they pumped from the well, constantly trying to keep the heritage orchard from stress. Thea watched the water bill climb from $60 to $600 and felt panic rising in her throat. The vegetable crops in the south field began to show heat damage despite their efforts. Tomato plants wilted even with evening watering. Lettuce bolted prematurely. They lost perhaps 30% of their projected harvest to conditions they couldn't control. Sully found her standing in the failing vegetable field one afternoon, staring at the evidence of nature's indifference to human plans. "This is farming." His voice carried no judgment, just flat statement of fact. "You can do everything right and still lose crops to weather. Question is whether you can absorb the loss and keep going. Can we—" Thea didn't look at him, watching instead as Kieran moved through the orchard with careful attention to each tree's water needs. Sully considered the question. Heritage orchards holding up better than the vegetables. Those old genetics know how to survive stress, and you've got enough market diversity that losing vegetables won't sink you. It'll hurt, but it won't kill. The farmers' market community had solidified over the summer months into something approaching genuine belonging. Thea shared booth space with a berry farmer named Janet, whose daughter Anya had become Kieran's constant companion. Cross-promotion helped everyone. Customers who came for strawberries often bought Meadowbrook vegetables and vice versa. The informal network of small producers created strength through cooperation that none of them could achieve alone. A feature article in the county newspaper brought unexpected attention. Widow revives historic Thornfield farm, ran with photos of the orchard and a sidebar about Nathaniel's lost apple varieties. Tourism curiosity spiked immediately. Weekend visitors drove out from the city wanting to see the farm, hear the story, buy something that connected them to agricultural heritage most of them had never experienced. The attention cut both ways. Some locals felt Thea was receiving disproportionate coverage for what they considered romanticized farming. Real farmers work commodity crops and struggle without media attention or preservation grants. The criticism stung partly because it contained truth. She did have advantages most struggling farmers didn't. Adelaide's backing a compelling story genetics that commanded premium prices. Garrett Ashford's construction crews broke ground on what Westridge was calling Meadowbrook Estates in early August. The irony of using Meadowbrook's name for a development that would erase agricultural land wasn't lost on Thea. Heavy equipment arrived on the neighboring property, and the sounds of Progress diesel engines, backup beepers, pile drivers setting foundations became the soundtrack to farm work. Dust from construction sites drifted across their property line on the prevailing wind. Traffic increased on the county road that served as their only access. Survey crews appeared regularly on the edges of Thea's land, always professional and apologetic, but clearly mapping the boundaries of what Westridge intended to claim. A letter arrived from Garrett in mid-August printed on Westridge Development letterhead. Dear Ms. Calloway, as we proceed with the Meadowbrook Estates project, we want to assure you that we'll minimize impact on your operations. Our construction managers have been instructed to observe all county noise ordinances and erosion control requirements. We look forward to being good neighbors. The courtesy felt calculated, a documentation of reasonableness for future reference. Adelaide appeared at the farm more frequently as summer progressed, her visits shifting from formal inspections to something approaching mentorship. She walked the orchard with Thea one afternoon in late August when the heat had finally broken and the air held hints of coming autumn. You've handled the drought better than I expected. Most new farmers panic when weather doesn't cooperate. Thea wiped sweat from her forehead despite the cooler temperature. I definitely panicked internally. Adelaide's expression softened in a way Thea had never seen before. But you didn't let it paralyze you. That's the difference that matters. They sat on the farmhouse porch while Sully worked with Kieran on grafting technique in the orchard. Bryn had spread her art supplies across the porch boards, sketching the changing light as afternoon slid toward evening. Adelaide's gaze drifted across the landscape with something that looked like old pain. I grew up on a farm in Vermont. 5 generations of my family worked the same land. Thea waited, sensing this was information Adelaide didn't share casually. My parents believed in legacy and maintaining what their parents had built. She paused, choosing words carefully. I believed in escape. Left for college at 18, never seriously considered returning. Law school, corporate career in New York, corner office with a view. All the markers of success our culture teaches us to chase. What changed? Adelaide's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. My father died when I was 42. Heart attack in the barn while checking on spring calves. My mother called and asked if I could come home, help her figure out how to keep the farm viable. I said I'd visit at Christmas, too busy with a corporate merger to take time off. The silence stretched between them, filled with the distant sounds of construction and the closer rustle of wind through orchard leaves. By the time I made it home at Christmas, she'd already accepted an offer from a development company. Couldn't manage alone, couldn't find anyone local willing to take it on. The farm sold in February. They demolished everything by April. When I finally understood what I'd lost, there was nothing left but street signs named after features that no longer existed. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate. Adelaide shook her head. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because I need you to understand why I'm so demanding, why I test whether you'll stay committed when things get difficult. She looked directly at Thea. I walked away from my heritage because I thought I had more important things to do. You're fighting to build one. I need to know you won't abandon it the way I did. The vulnerability in Adelaide's admission shifted something fundamental in their relationship. I won't promise I'll never fail. Thea's honesty felt necessary. But I can promise I won't quit just because it's hard. Adelaide nodded slowly. That's all anyone can promise. The rest is just showing up and doing the work. Over the following weeks, Adelaide began teaching Thea the business aspects that no amount of agricultural knowledge could provide. Contract negotiation, pricing strategy, legal protections for intellectual property. She connected Thea to her network specialty food distributors interested in heritage products, grant opportunities through agricultural preservation programs, marketing consultants who understood the farm-to-table movement. This isn't charity. Adelaide made the distinction clear each time. These are opportunities you still have to prove yourself worthy of. I'm opening doors, but you have to walk through them and deliver quality that justifies the introduction. September arrived with the relief of cooler temperatures and the anticipation of harvest. The standard apple trees scattered through the orchard varieties planted after Nathaniel's time, but before the farm's abandonment, bore their first significant crop under proper management. 1,200 pounds of conventional apples, nothing rare or premium, but solid produce that commanded fair market prices. Sully taught Thea and Kieran proper harvest technique. Pick with the stem intact, handle each apple like it's fragile because it is checked for bruising or damage before packing. The work was physical and repetitive and deeply satisfying in ways that waitressing had never been. At day's end, Thea's shoulders ached and her hands bore new calluses, but the boxes of clean apples represented something built rather than just time exchanged for wages. The farmers' market sales over 2 weekends brought $4,800 revenue, far exceeding Thea's projections. Customers responded to the story and the quality, willing to pay premium prices for apples that came with provenance and personal connection to the grower. Adelaide approved converting a section of the barn for small-scale cider production, advancing funds from the Year 3 budget, because the opportunity seemed ripe for acceleration. Kieran became fascinated with fermentation science, reading everything he could find about traditional cider making and modern improvements in technique and quality control. Dr. Patricia Oakes offered a partnership that added academic credibility to their operation. The university wanted exclusive access to genetic samples from the Thornfield heritage varieties for their breeding program research. In exchange, they'd provide technical support, laboratory analysis, and co-branding that would help Meadowbrook's marketing efforts. October brought media attention that exceeded anything the county newspaper feature had generated. State Agricultural Magazine ran a cover story titled, "Lost Apple Varieties Rediscovered at Historic Pennsylvania Farm." The article featured photos of the heritage orchard, detailed Nathaniel Thornfield's breeding work, and positioned Meadowbrook as exemplar of agricultural preservation meeting commercial viability. Customer traffic at the farmers' market spiked dramatically. People drove from Pittsburgh and beyond, wanting to taste the standard apples and hear about the heritage varieties that would come in future seasons. A specialty grocery buyer from the city approached Thea with a wholesale inquiry. "We'd like to carry your heritage apples next season. Whatever quantity you can supply at $8 per pound." The number represented more than 5 times what conventional apples commanded. Thea's careful projections suddenly seemed conservative rather than optimistic. If the heritage trees produced even moderate yields, the revenue potential transformed from hopeful to genuinely promising. But November arrived with complications that reminded her nothing in farming came without cost. Westridge Development's construction accelerated as they rushed to complete Phase 1 housing before winter weather complicated their work. Heavy equipment ran longer hours, and the noise became intrusive enough that Thea had trouble concentrating on paperwork at the cottage. More concerning than noise was water. The well pressure that had been steady since they'd moved to the farm began dropping noticeably in early November. Sully tested the flow rate and discovered it had decreased by nearly 40% from summer levels. The water remained safe to drink, but the reduced volume threatened their ability to irrigate the orchard adequately when spring arrived. Thea walked the property line where Westridge's development was taking shape and saw massive excavations for basement foundations, drainage systems that redirected groundwater flow, impermeable surfaces that prevented natural recharge of the aquifer. The connection seemed obvious even without hydrological expertise. She filed a complaint with the County Water Resource Board, working through the bureaucratic process with Adelaide's guidance. Garrett Ashford responded within a week through Westridge's environmental consultants. Their pre-construction studies had shown minimal impact on surrounding water resources. The development met all regulatory requirements. Any correlation between their work and Meadowbrook's well pressure was coincidental rather than causal. The hearing was scheduled for mid-November at the County Administration Building. Thea had never navigated anything like this formal proceedings with commissioners who held authority over issues she barely understood. Adelaide coached her but made the boundaries clear. You have to speak for yourself. I can provide research and context, but your voice carries more weight than mine because you're the one directly affected. The hearing room held perhaps 30 people when Thea arrived with Sully and Adelaide. Garrett sat at a table with 3 professionals, an engineer, an environmental consultant, and Westridge's attorney. Their presentation materials were polished. Their data professionally formatted, their confidence evident in the casual way they reviewed notes while waiting for the proceedings to begin. The county commission consisted of 5 members representing different districts and interests. Their expressions ranged from engaged to skeptical to openly bored. Chair Harrison called the meeting to order with perfunctory efficiency. We're here regarding complaint filed by Thea Calloway concerning water resource impact from Westridge Development's Meadowbrook Estates project. Garrett's team presented first using slides and charts that demonstrated their environmental compliance. Our pre-construction hydrological study identified the aquifer serving this region and modeled potential impacts from our development. The study, conducted by certified professionals and reviewed by county staff, concluded that our project would have negligible effect on surrounding well systems. He displayed data showing water table depths, seasonal variation, and projected drawdown rates that stayed within acceptable parameters. The environmental consultant spoke next, walking through their stormwater management plan and erosion control measures. Every aspect of our construction meets or exceeds county requirements. We've installed monitoring wells at 3 locations to track groundwater levels throughout the development process. None of those wells show significant change from baseline measurements. Thea's turn came without the polish of professional presentation. She had Sully's handwritten logs showing well pressure over 6 months and her own photographs of the excavation work. The facts were simple, even if the technical explanations weren't. Our well pressure has dropped 40% since construction began. We depend on that water for orchard irrigation. If the trend continues, we won't have adequate supply for our heritage trees next summer. Commissioner Valdez interrupted with a question. Can you prove the development caused the pressure drop? Thea felt her inadequacy acutely. I can show correlation. We had steady pressure until excavation started. Now it's declining. The timing isn't coincidence, but correlation isn't causation. Garrett's tone stayed professional. Seasonal variation, changing precipitation patterns, increased usage from the farm's expansion, any of these could explain pressure changes. Without scientific evidence linking our work to Ms. Calloway's well, we can't accept responsibility for natural fluctuation. Sully spoke up from the audience, his decades of practical experience lending weight to observation over academic credentials. I've worked this land for 20 years. The well's been rock steady until this fall. The only thing that changed is 1 million cubic yards of earth getting moved next door. The commissioners deliberated briefly before Chair Harrison delivered their decision. We're requiring Westridge Development to install dedicated water monitoring equipment on the Calloway property and submit monthly reports for 12 months. If well pressure drops below minimum threshold levels during that period, Westridge will be required to provide supplemental water supply or cease construction until the issue is resolved. Not the full victory Thea had hoped for, but protection that mattered. Garrett accepted the ruling with professional grace. We'll comply fully with the monitoring requirements. His private comment to Thea as they left felt less gracious. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Ms. Calloway. We're trying to be good neighbors. The community response to the hearing fractured along predictable lines. Some supported Thea's willingness to fight for her water rights. Others saw obstruction of economic development that would bring jobs and tax revenue. 1 old farm versus 200 construction jobs. The question appeared in letters to the county newspaper and conversations at the diner where Thea still worked reduced hours. Maeve O'Sullivan defended her fiercely to customers who questioned why one widow's hobby farm should slow progress. It's not a hobby when it's your livelihood, and water rights matter whether you're farming 1 acre or 1,000. But even Maeve's loyalty couldn't eliminate the isolation Thea felt as someone positioned against development that many in the community genuinely wanted. Kieran found her sitting on the farmhouse porch one evening after a particularly difficult day of sideways comments and pointed questions. His voice carried the protective edge of someone who'd heard his mother criticized. "You won the hearing. That's what matters." Thea pulled her jacket tighter against November cold. "Winning doesn't feel like winning when half the town thinks you're in the wrong. They're not farmers." Kieran sat beside her on the steps. "They don't understand that without water, none of this works." Thea appreciated his certainty, even as she recognized the complexity he was too young to fully grasp. Sometimes right and wrong aren't as clear as we want them to be. Westridge is creating jobs. People need jobs. I need water. Both things can be true. Winter settled over Mapleton County with the quiet that comes after harvest is complete and before spring planning begins. Farm work slowed to maintenance tasks, equipment repairs, and the endless small projects that never seemed finished. Thea reduced her diner hours to 20 per week as farm income stabilized enough to support the change. The financial margin remained thin, but manageable. Her first-year quarterly report to Adelaide ran 8 pages, documenting operations and revenue in detail. Farm sustainable through combined farmers' market income and reduced external employment. Heritage orchard showing excellent recovery in health. Standard apple production exceeded projections. Water resource concern being monitored per county order. Family adjustment complete and positive. Adelaide reviewed the report during a January visit when snow covered the ground and the orchard stood in stark winter beauty. "You've exceeded expectations across every metric that matters." She closed the folder with decisive finality. "Most partnerships I enter struggle through year 1. You're actually building momentum." Thea felt validation that went deeper than business success. "Thank you for believing this could work." Adelaide's expression carried something that might have been satisfaction. "I didn't believe it could work. I believed you might be capable of making it work. There's a difference." She paused before adding, "Garrett Ashford called me last week, offered to purchase the property for twice what I paid at auction. I told him the land was already committed to agricultural preservation. The protection mattered, but Thea recognized it wasn't permanent. What happens when the 5-year lease ends and I have option to purchase?" Adelaide's pale gray eyes assessed her steadily. "If you've maintained the trajectory you're on, purchasing won't be an issue. The property's value is increasing because of your work, not despite it." Kieran had transformed over the past year from reluctant transplant to confident young farmer. 15 years old and talking seriously about agricultural programs for college. His relationship with Anya had deepened into something that looked like first love, and their families had begun discussing collaborative projects, berry and apple products that could expand both operations' market reach. Bryn's change was equally dramatic but manifested differently. 11 years old and grounded in ways she'd never been in the city. Her illustrated journal documenting farm seasons through watercolors had won a regional art award. The recognition brought requests for school presentations that built farm awareness and Bryn's confidence simultaneously. Thea's own transformation ran deeper than she could easily articulate. When she looked in the mirror now, she saw a farmer rather than a waitress who happened to work a farm. The shift in identity came through calloused hands and sun-weathered skin, through knowledge earned from mistakes and successes, through the confidence of someone who'd proven they could build something that mattered. Nathaniel's journal had become her companion during quiet winter evenings. His entry from December 1890 seemed to speak directly to her experience. "Third winter on this land. The hardest season teaches the most valuable lessons. In stillness you see clearly what spring will demand. I plan now for trees I'll plant in April harvest. I'll gather in September." Farming is faith made visible, believing that careful work today creates abundance you may not see for years. The observation resonated with Thea's growing understanding that success in agriculture operated on timelines that defied conventional business thinking. You planted, tended, waited, and trusted that nature would honor the partnership if you held up your end of the bargain. Garrett's letter arrived in late January, printed on expensive stationery that suggested importance. Westridge Meadowbrook Estates Phase 1 nearing completion. 24 homes sold, occupancy beginning March. Phase 2 planned for 36 additional homes on adjacent parcels. County approval process beginning February. We remain interested in incorporating your property as the crown jewel of our development. Current offer, $210,000 cash, immediate closing. Thea read it twice and felt nothing except mild irritation at the interruption. The offer was generous by any objective measure, more than 7 times what she'd been prepared to bid at auction 18 months ago. But the question of selling Meadowbrook no longer registered as something requiring serious consideration. This place had become home in ways that transcended financial calculation. She filed the letter without responding and returned to planning spring operations. Dr. Oakes had projected that some of the heritage trees might produce limited fruit this season ahead of the original 3-year timeline. 200 to 300 pounds total if conditions proved favorable. Not enough for commercial scale, but sufficient for market testing and generating customer interest. March arrived with a particular quality of light that announced winter's retreat. The orchard emerged from dormancy with vigor that exceeded even Sully's optimistic projections. The heritage varieties showed exceptional bud development, and the standard trees bore clear evidence of proper pruning and care, transforming their productive capacity. Thea walked through the blooming orchard on a morning when frost still clung to the grass in shadows, and felt something approaching certainty. Not the comfortable certainty of guaranteed outcomes, but the harder-earned certainty that came from knowing you were doing work that mattered regardless of results. Kieran appeared with his phone photographing the blossoms for the farm's social media presence. Dr. Oakes called. She says the genetics analysis on those heritage varieties is generating interest from commercial breeders. People want to license the genetics for their own breeding programs. Thea absorbed this information, recognizing another revenue stream she hadn't anticipated. How much interest? Preliminary inquiries suggesting maybe $15,000 annually if we licensed to 3 operations. Kieran's excitement was contagious. That's separate from what we make actually growing and selling the apples. Bryn joined them with her sketchbook settling onto the grass to capture the morning light through the blossoms. Phone in Thea's pocket buzzed with incoming call. Maeve's name on the screen. You need to come to town. Garrett just announced Phase 2 at the Chamber of Commerce breakfast. County hearing scheduled for June 15th. This is the big one. He's asking for approval to develop everything around you. The peaceful morning contracted into sharp focus. How much land? Thea's question came out flat. Maeve's voice carried tension. 85 acres, 3 sides of your property. If this goes through, you'll be completely surrounded by suburban development. After the call ended, Thea stood among the blooming heritage trees and felt the weight of coming conflict settle onto her shoulders. Kieran and Bryn had stopped their activities, sensing the shift. What's happening? Kieran's question demanded honesty. Westridge is forcing a decision. Thea kept her voice steady despite churning anxiety. County has to approve or deny their expansion. If they approve, we're an island in the middle of suburban development. If they deny, Westridge probably sues and the legal battle drags on for years. What do we do? Bryn's small voice carried fear that Thea understood too well. We fight. Not because we'll necessarily win, but because what we're building here is worth fighting for. She gestured to the orchard, the careful work they'd invested, the heritage they were preserving. Nathaniel Thornfield didn't surrender when railroads wanted his land. We won't surrender to developers who want to erase agricultural heritage for profit. The construction sounds from Westridge's existing development drifted across their property on the morning breeze. Thea's phone rang again. Adelaide this time. I assume you've heard about the hearing. Her voice was crisp and focused. We have 3 months to build a case. Start documenting everything. Water quality, farm operations, revenue, community impact. This won't be one on emotion. It'll be one on evidence that what you're doing creates more value than what they're proposing. That evening, Thea opened Nathaniel's journal to an entry she'd marked weeks earlier. April 1893. The railroad company increased their offer again. Their terms grow more generous with each rejection. What they cannot offer because they cannot comprehend it is the right to tend living things toward their potential rather than exploit them for immediate profit. Some battles must be fought not because victory is certain, but because surrender is unthinkable. The parallel to her own situation felt almost eerie in its precision. Thea sat at the kitchen table with the journal open before her and made lists of what needed to happen before June. Document farm operations, organize community support, prepare testimony, research water rights law, calculate economic impact, coordinate with Adelaide and Dr. Oakes on technical aspects. Kieran found her there near midnight, surrounded by papers and notes. "You should sleep, Mom." She looked up at her son, 15 years old, and somehow wiser than she'd been at twice his age. "After I finish this section," he sat across from her, gathering some of the scattered papers into organized stacks. "Then I'll help. We're in this together." The words Thea had spoken to herself countless times since Owen's death returned with new weight. We didn't come this far to quit when it got complicated. The orchard outside stood in darkness, its blossoms invisible but no less real for being unseen. Spring had arrived despite winter's resistance. Growth continued whether or not anyone watched, and somewhere in that persistence lived the faith that careful work today created harvests. Tomorrow, even harvests you might not live to see. The forgotten orchard was being remembered, and that remembering was worth whatever fight lay ahead. The county's public notice appeared in the newspaper's legal section the first week of April. Dry bureaucratic language that failed to capture the stakes involved. Public hearing scheduled June 15th regarding rezoning application for Westridge Development Phase 2, 85 acres adjacent to existing Meadowbrook Estates. Residential development, 36 single-family homes. Thea organized a meeting at the farm for anyone willing to help mount opposition. 15 people gathered in the barn on a Saturday afternoon when spring rain drummed on the metal roof. Maeve O'Sullivan brought coffee and determination. Sully attended despite his usual reluctance toward political engagement. 3 neighboring farmers showed up, including one who'd been openly skeptical about Thea's prospects 18 months ago. Dr. Patricia Oakes drove from the university. Adelaide arrived last, carrying a briefcase that suggested serious preparation. "We can't just oppose development," Thea addressed the assembled group from where she stood beside a makeshift podium. "We need to present an alternative vision that makes economic and practical sense. Pure preservation arguments won't win when Westridge is promising jobs and tax revenue." The strategy discussion revealed the fragility of their coalition. The environmental activists wanted to emphasize ecosystem protection and water table concerns. The farmers worried about precedent. If Westridge could develop around one farm, others would follow. The Historical Society representative focused on Nathaniel Thornfield's legacy and architectural preservation. Dr. Oakes brought scientific credibility regarding the heritage apple genetics. Finding common ground proved harder than Thea anticipated. Each faction had legitimate interests that didn't necessarily align. The young couple who'd moved to Mapleton County for affordable housing argued that not everyone could oppose development while simultaneously complaining about lack of opportunity for the next generation. By the time the meeting ended 3 hours later, they'd agreed on a multi-pronged approach. Environmental impact, economic value of heritage agriculture, historical significance and community character. Not opposition to all growth, but advocacy for balanced development that preserved what made the county distinctive while allowing reasonable expansion. The personal cost of preparation became apparent quickly. Thea spent hours she didn't have attending additional meetings, coordinating testimony, reviewing county ordinances, and zoning regulations. Farm work suffered as she divided attention between immediate operational needs and the looming hearing. She lost weight she couldn't afford to lose, survived on insufficient sleep, and felt the constant low-grade anxiety of someone fighting battles on multiple fronts simultaneously. Kieran and Bryn compensated by taking on responsibilities beyond their years. 15 and 11 years old, managing aspects of farm operations that should have been adult work. The pride Thea felt in their capability mixed uneasily with guilt about the childhood experiences they were sacrificing. Adelaide's concern manifested during a late April visit when she found Thea working through financial projections at 2 in the morning. "You're burning yourself out before the hearing even arrives." The observation was accurate and unhelpful. "I don't have a choice. Every hour I'm not preparing is an hour Garrett's team uses to build their case." Adelaide sat uninvited at the kitchen table. "You do have choices. You're choosing to carry everything yourself rather than delegate or accept limitations. Thea felt defensive irritation rise. Easy to say when you're not the one whose future depends on winning. The words came out harsher than intended, but Adelaide didn't flinch. My future doesn't depend on it. Yours does. Which is precisely why you need to pace yourself. A brilliant presentation you're too exhausted to deliver effectively is worse than an adequate one you can actually execute. The rebuke landed because it was true. Thea forced herself to establish boundaries 8 hours weekly dedicated to hearing preparation no more. The discipline felt impossible to maintain, but Adelaide's monitoring helped enforce it. May arrived with the first harvest from the heritage trees earlier and more abundant than Dr. Oakes had projected. 12 of the strongest specimens bore fruit, 280 pounds total across the 5 varieties. Not commercial quantity, but sufficient for the taste testing that would determine whether Nathaniel Thornfield's 40 years of breeding work had produced something genuinely exceptional. Dr. Oakes arranged a professional evaluation with 3 specialty food buyers, 2 artisan cidery operators, and a chef whose farm-to-table restaurant in Pittsburgh had earned regional acclaim. They gathered at the farm on a morning when the orchard showed the lush growth of late spring, and Thea felt her stomach knot with anticipation that bordered on nausea. The tasting proceeded with formal structure. Each variety presented separately evaluated for appearance, aroma, texture, flavor, and aftertaste. The buyers made notes without expression, their professional detachment making it impossible to gauge reactions. Thea stood aside with Kieran and Bryn watching strangers assess fruit that represented 2 years of relentless work and uncertain future. Chef Marco from Pittsburgh spoke first, after completing his evaluation. The Thornfield Gold is the best aromatic apple I've tasted in 15 years of sourcing heritage varieties. The complexity is remarkable, tropical notes, honey undertones with acidity that prevents it from being cloying. The cidery operator held up a sample of Meadowbrook Crimson. Perfect acid balance for fermentation. This would produce cider with structure and character that commercial varieties can't match. I'd take your entire crop if you could supply it. One buyer after another confirmed the exceptional quality. The Spice Harvest variety carried flavor notes unlike anything in current commercial production. The Winter Keeper showed storage capacity that made it valuable for year-round availability. Every variety demonstrated characteristics that justified premium pricing and exclusive arrangements. Dr. Oakes pulled Thea aside while the buyers continued their discussion. These genetics are marketable at the highest tier. You're not just preserving agricultural history. You're introducing commercially viable varieties that didn't exist in modern markets. The value proposition is extraordinary. Wholesale offers materialized immediately. $8 per pound firm commitment for next season's full harvest. The mathematics transformed Thea's projections from hopeful to genuinely promising. If the trees reached even modest production levels, revenue would exceed what she'd considered optimistic scenarios. The local television station picked up the story. Lost Apples Worth Their Weight in Gold ran as a human interest piece that went mildly viral on social media. Food bloggers discovered Meadowbrook and wrote posts that generated thousands of shares. Orders for next year's harvest poured in before current season's fruit had even ripened fully. Suddenly, Meadowbrook wasn't just the farm Thea was trying to save. It represented unique agricultural heritage with documented commercial value. The narrative shifted from preservation versus progress to different models of what progress could mean. Late May brought Adelaide to the farm with an expression that suggested serious business. She waited until Kieran and Bryn were occupied with evening chores before speaking. I need to discuss something with you, Thea, not as your landlord or business partner, as someone who's come to care about your success. The preamble made Thea nervous. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Adelaide's pale gray eyes held unusual warmth. Everything is remarkably right, which is why I'm making you an offer. I didn't anticipate making this early. She pulled documents from her briefcase and spread them on the cottage table. This is a property transfer deed. No payment required, no conditions beyond maintaining the heritage orchard and preserving Nathaniel's story. I'm giving you Meadowbrook Farm. Outright. Today if you'll accept it. The offer hit like physical impact. Thea couldn't immediately process the implications. "You're giving me property worth $300,000. Adelaide's expression softened in a way Thea had rarely seen. "You've earned it through commitment and execution. Most people I partner with never reach this point. You've exceeded every metric that matters. But there's a hearing in 2 weeks." Thea's mind raced through the strategic implications. "If I own the property now, I have different legal standing to fight Westridge." Adelaide nodded. "That's part of why I'm offering now. You'll have more authority as a landowner than as a tenant fighting on someone else's behalf." Thea stood and walked to the window overlooking the orchard where late afternoon light turned the leaves golden. The gift was life-changing, everything she'd hoped for when she first saw the auction listing. But something about the timing felt wrong in ways she struggled to articulate. "Can we wait?" Her own question surprised her. Adelaide's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Wait for what?" "Until after the hearing." Thea turned to face her benefactor. "If I accept this now, it looks like I'm being given special treatment, like I didn't earn it on my own merit. The community needs to see me fight this battle as someone who's worked for what she has not, as someone who was handed opportunity." Adelaide considered this for a long moment. "You're afraid of appearing privileged." Thea shook her head. "I am privileged. You gave me a chance most people in my position would never get. But I want to win this hearing on the strength of what we've built, not because I suddenly own property that changes my legal standing." The logic wasn't purely strategic. Thea recognized a deeper need to prove to herself more than anyone that she could succeed through capability rather than advantage. Adelaide's gift mattered precisely because Thea wanted to earn it through demonstrated achievement rather than accept it as charity, however well-intentioned. "You've grown considerably." Adelaide's voice carried approval that meant more than Thea expected. "When we started this partnership, you were desperate and uncertain. Now you're making decisions based on principle rather than expedience." She gathered the documents without signing them. "We'll revisit this after the hearing. Regardless of outcome, the property becomes yours. But you're right that fighting as someone who's built something matters more than fighting as someone who owns something." The county gymnasium filled beyond capacity on June 15th, the crowd spilling into the hallways and outside where people waited for updates from those inside. 400 people according to the fire marshal's count, the largest turnout for a commission hearing in county history. Local television stations set up cameras. The newspaper sent both their regular reporter and a photographer. The 5 county commissioners sat at a long table on the stage looking somewhat overwhelmed by the turnout and the clear stakes involved. Chair Harrison called the meeting to order with a gavel that barely registered over the crowd noise. "We're here to consider rezoning application from Westridge Development for Phase 2 of Meadowbrook Estates. The applicant will present first, followed by public comment." Garrett Ashford's presentation occupied 45 minutes of polished professionalism. His team used slides and video to demonstrate economic impact. 200 construction jobs over 18 months, 36 new families bringing children to schools and revenue to local businesses, $800,000 in annual property tax revenue, affordable housing component addressing documented county shortage. The environmental compliance documentation was thorough. Every regulation met or exceeded. Water management systems designed by certified engineers. Stormwater controls that actually improved runoff quality compared to existing agricultural use. Wildlife corridors preserved. Native plantings specified. The architecture rendered tastefully respecting rural character while providing modern amenities young families required. Community spaces including parks and trails. Fiber optic infrastructure bringing high-speed internet access that current residents lacked. Garrett's closing argument hit themes designed to resonate with commissioners facing re-election. This development represents investment in Mapleton County's future. Jobs for people who need them. Housing for families who want to raise children here. Tax revenue for services everyone benefits from. We're not erasing the past. We're building a future that honors where we've been while creating opportunity for where we're going. Dr. Oakes presented the scientific case for agricultural preservation, 20 minutes of data about heritage genetics and their commercial value. The Historical Society representative discussed Nathaniel Thornfield's legacy and the architectural significance of the farmstead structures. The environmental group emphasized water table concerns with documentation Garrett's team had to acknowledge, if not fully accept. Adelaide's presentation focused on legal precedent and economic analysis, demonstrating that heritage agriculture could generate comparable tax revenue to residential development while preserving working landscapes. 15 minutes of carefully constructed argument that residential development produced short-term gains and long-term costs, while agricultural operations sustained value across generations. Thea's turn arrived with her pulse hammering in her ears. She'd prepared extensively, but standing before 400 people and 5 commissioners who would determine her future felt surreal. Her presentation materials consisted of harvest data revenue projections and photographs documenting transformation from abandoned property to functioning farm. "I'm not here to argue against growth or development." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Mapleton County needs economic opportunity. Young families deserve housing options. But growth and preservation aren't opposing forces. They can coexist if we plan thoughtfully rather than default to whichever option is easiest to execute." She described Nathaniel Thornfield's work developing unique apple varieties through 4 decades of careful breeding. The rediscovery of those genetics after nearly a century, the authentication by university scientists, the commercial interest from specialty buyers willing to pay premium prices for quality that mass production couldn't replicate. The numbers spoke clearly. Heritage apple production projected at $75,000 annually by year 3. Cidery operations adding another $45,000 by year 5. Agritourism and educational programming providing additional revenue streams while creating jobs that sustained rather than extracted from the landscape. "This farm isn't just my family's livelihood." Thea met each commissioner's gaze in turn. It represents a different model of rural economic development, one that values quality over quantity, heritage over homogeneity, sustainability over short-term gain. Westridge's proposal offers conventional suburban expansion. "We're demonstrating that agricultural innovation can compete economically while preserving the character that makes this county worth living in." Her specific request avoided demanding full denial. Approve reduced footprint. 28 homes instead of 36. 400-foot buffer from Meadowbrook property to protect agricultural operations. Mandatory water monitoring and mitigation if impacts occur. Recognition of Meadowbrook as county heritage site with corresponding protections. We can have both development and heritage, but only if we choose to plan for both rather than sacrifice one for the other. Public comment consumed another hour. A young father spoke about needing affordable housing so his children could grow up near family. An elderly farmer worried about precedent and the systematic conversion of agricultural land to residential use. A teacher described taking her students to Meadowbrook and the educational value that couldn't be replicated in textbooks. Kieran stood when the microphone became available, his 15-year-old frame somehow appearing both young and mature simultaneously. "I'm Thea Calloway's son. When we moved to this farm 18 months ago, I hated it. I wanted my old life back, my friends, my routine, everything that felt normal." He paused, gathering courage for what came next. "But this farm taught me something more important than easy or comfortable. It taught me that building something meaningful requires work that doesn't stop when you're tired. My mom could have sold 6 different times. We could be comfortable right now instead of working 14-hour days." His voice strengthened with certainty. "But comfortable isn't the same as proud. I'm proud of what we've built, proud that we're preserving something that almost disappeared. Please don't force us to choose between development and heritage when you have the power to approve both." The audience reaction was mixed, some moved by his sincerity, others unmoved by sentiment when jobs and housing were at stake. Garrett used his rebuttal time to acknowledge Thea's work while reframing the fundamental question. "Ms. Calloway's passion is admirable. Her success is genuine. But passion and success don't pay county bills or employ the 200 people currently out of work." He gestured to the economic impact data. "We're offering concrete benefits to the entire community, not just one family." The question before this commission is whether you choose documented economic development or agricultural preservation that benefits very few people at the expense of many. The commissioners requested 30 minutes for deliberation. The crowd spilled into hallways and outside speculation running wild about how the vote would fall. Thea stood with Adelaide and her children feeling drained and uncertain despite the strength of their presentation. "Whatever happens, you fought well." Adelaide's voice carried quiet conviction. "The outcome matters, but so does knowing you gave everything to something worth fighting for." The commission reconvened to a gymnasium that had somehow gotten louder during the break. Chair Harrison's expression was unreadable as he called for order. "This decision will shape our county for decades. We've heard compelling arguments from both sides. The applicant has met every technical requirement. The opposition has demonstrated legitimate concerns and alternative value." He paused, letting silence build. "After careful consideration, I'm voting to approve Westridge's development with modifications. 28 homes instead of 36. 400-foot buffer from the Callaway property. Mandatory water monitoring with mitigation requirements if impacts occur. And formal recognition of Meadowbrook Farm as a county heritage site. Commissioner Valdez voted against any restrictions. Commissioner Park voted for the modified plan. Commissioner Thompson voted against restrictions. Commissioner Wright voted for modifications. 3-2 approval of scale development with protections. The gymnasium erupted into mixed reactions. Some cheering the compromise, others angry that development was approved at all, still others frustrated that it had been scaled back. Thea felt relief and exhaustion in equal measure. Not perfect victory, but genuine protection that mattered. Garrett approached after the crowd began dispersing, his expression professionally neutral. "That was a good fight, Ms. Callaway. You represented your interests effectively." His tone shifted slightly. "We can make the modified plan work. And I meant what I said about wanting to be good neighbors. Our development restaurant would be interested in exclusive supply arrangement for your heritage apples. $500 monthly minimum guarantee." The offer was transactional, but genuine. Strange how opponents could become partners when financial interests aligned. Thea accepted his handshake. "We'll discuss terms." July 1st arrived with paperwork and ceremony that felt anticlimactic after the hearing's intensity. Adelaide transferred the property deed to Thea in the county clerk's office with minimal formality. No payment required beyond the 2 years of work and commitment that had transformed abandoned land into thriving farm. "You earned this through execution, not luck." Adelaide's pale gray eyes held something approaching pride. "Most people I partner with never reach this point. You didn't just meet expectations, you exceeded them in ways that matter." Thea couldn't find words adequate to the moment. "Thank you feels insufficient for what you've given me." Adelaide shook her head slightly. "I gave you opportunity. You gave it life. There's a difference." The formal heritage site designation brought benefits beyond symbolic recognition. A small annual grant, $5,000 for preservation and educational programming. Tourism promotion through the county website. Educational partnerships with school districts. Not transformative revenue, but meaningful support that acknowledged public value in what they were building. Dr. Oakes secured a university research grant, $20,000 over 3 years, making Meadowbrook a living laboratory for heritage apple breeding and commercial viability studies. The academic partnership added credibility that enhanced marketing efforts. Kieran's transformation into confident young farmer continued accelerating. 16 in August, already talking about agricultural programs for college with the seriousness of someone who'd found genuine calling. His relationship with Anya had evolved into partnership, exploring collaborative berry apple products that could expand both families' market reach. Bryn's illustrated book, A Year at Meadowbrook Farm, found a small regional publisher willing to print 2,000 copies. The watercolors captured seasonal changes with sensitivity that adults appreciated as much as children. School presentations built farm awareness while developing Bryn's confidence beyond anything Thea had imagined possible 18 months ago. September's second heritage harvest brought 800 pounds across the 5 varieties, nearly triple the previous year's yield. The harvest party drew 60 volunteers who came to help and stayed for celebration. Music cider pressing demonstrations. Food contributed by everyone who felt invested in Meadowbrook's success. Dr. Oakes brought university students for hands-on agricultural education. Local television covered the event with enthusiasm that positioned Meadowbrook as success story rather than controversial preservation project. The narrative had shifted from farm versus development to both-end possibility. The cidery soft opening in October presented Thornfield Heritage Cider in limited release. 500 bottles at $20 each sold out through pre-orders before production was complete. $10,000 revenue from a product that hadn't existed a year ago. Adelaide visited for the official Year 2 review, walking the orchard with Thea on an afternoon when autumn color blazed across the landscape. Revenue $45,000, exceeding projections by 15%. Farm sustainable without external employment. Heritage orchard thriving beyond optimistic scenarios. Community integrated and supportive. Kieran and Bryn flourishing in measurable ways. You've built something remarkable here. Adelaide's assessment carried weight because she didn't offer praise lightly. 2 years from desperate single mother to successful farmer and businesswoman. Most people couldn't execute that transformation. Thea felt the truth of it in her bones and calloused hands and sun-weathered skin. I had help. Teachers who believed when I doubted. Adelaide's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Everyone needs help. Not everyone uses it effectively. Garrett's visit in late October came without warning or agenda beyond conversation. He walked the orchard boundary where Westridge's development was now visible. 12 homes occupied, families settling and children playing in yards that had been agricultural fields 2 years ago. My company wants to develop a new model. His directness remained consistent. Farm-to-table development that integrates working agriculture instead of replacing it. We think Meadowbrook could be template. He outlined a consulting arrangement, $15,000 annually for advising Westridge on agricultural integration in future projects. Thea considered the proposal with caution born from experience. Better to influence development from inside than fight from outside. The work could shape how growth happened in other places. I'll need to think about it. Take your time. Garrett's tone suggested genuine respect rather than corporate courtesy. You've proven that heritage and development can coexist. That's valuable knowledge. November arrived with crisp air and the particular light that made everything appear sharper, more defined. 2 years since the auction where Thea had lost her bid and found her future. The anniversary felt significant in ways that transcended calendar dates. She walked through the orchard alone early morning before Kieran and Bryn woke, before farm operations demanded attention, before the day filled with the necessary work of keeping everything moving forward. The heritage trees stood vigorous and healthy, bearing evidence of proper care transforming potential into reality. The main house renovation had progressed through Phase 1 interior work. The cottage felt like home in ways the cramped apartment never had. In the distance, Westridge's development showed signs of morning lights in windows, cars pulling out of driveways. The quiet domesticity of suburban life. Not the enemy she'd imagined. Just different model of existence coexisting with agricultural operations because someone had fought to make both possible. Thea carried Nathaniel's journal to the restored farmhouse parlor where they'd discovered the vault. The display case now held selections from his papers, photographs, and historical documentation. She opened to the final entry written weeks before his death in 1924. November 10th, 1924. I am old now, and this farm has been my life's work. Not because it made me wealthy, it did not, but because it made me part of something larger than myself. To future stewards tend what I have planted. Add what you envision. The land endures beyond any of us. Our task is not to own it, but to be worthy of it. The words carried weight across the century between them. Thea pulled a pen from her pocket and turned to the journal's last blank page. Her handwriting looked strange beside Nathaniel's elegant script, but the message felt necessary. November 20, 26. Nathaniel, I found your vault, your varieties, your vision. I've tried to honor all three. The farm endures. Your apples grow. Your story lives. And I learned something you probably knew. I didn't save this farm. It saved me. Thank you." She closed the journal carefully and returned it to the display, a completed circle connecting past to present to whatever future would come. Kieran and Bryn emerged from the cottage as morning light strengthened. Ready, Mom customers coming at 9 for the tasting room. Bryn held up new signs she'd painted for the entrance. "I made them prettier than the old ones. Let's go to work." The three of them walked through Orchard Rows where Sully was already checking irrigation lines. Maeve's car pulled up the driveway bringing friends for the farm tour she'd organized. The day unfolding as days did now, purposeful work among people who valued what they were building together. The tasting room filled with 30 people sampling cider and learning about heritage varieties and Nathaniel's breeding work. Kieran explained grafting techniques to visitors with the confidence of someone who genuinely understood what he was teaching. Bryn sold illustrated postcards and books from the display table she'd organized with artistic precision. Adelaide watched from the edge with satisfaction that needed no verbal expression. Garrett's children picked apples under supervision in the U-Pick section they'd opened in October. Sully conducted a pruning workshop for farmers interested in heritage orchard management. Thea moved through the space pouring samples, answering questions, seeing herself reflected in customers' eyes, not as desperate widow or charity case, but as successful farmer who'd built something worth visiting. The sun settled toward the horizon, painting the sky in autumn colors. The farmhouse lights came on restoration, breathing life into structure that had stood empty so long. The Meadowbrook farm sign by the road showed new lettering, established 1886, restored 2024. Not preserved in amber like museum piece, living and growing and evolving as Nathaniel had intended, the land enduring not despite human intervention but because of careful attention from people who understood that stewardship meant partnership rather than dominance. Thea stood at Orchard's edge as evening deepened, watching her children laugh with volunteers, watching community gather around work that mattered beyond individual benefit. The construction sounds from West Ridge's development had faded to distant backgrounds still present but no longer threatening. Different versions of future coexisting because someone had insisted both were possible. Her internal voice had changed over 2 years from desperate questions to quiet certainty. Not certainty of outcomes, those remained unknowable and subject to weather markets and circumstances beyond control. But certainty of purpose, of belonging to work larger than herself, of building something that could outlast her, whether she saw its full maturity or not. The words formed silently, truth earned through every failure and success, every doubt overcome and lesson learned. We didn't save the farm. We earned the right to try. And trying with everything you have towards something worth achieving, that's not sacrifice. That's the only success that matters. Camera pulled back across Orchard in autumn glory, farmhouse glowing with light and activity development visible in distance but not consuming agricultural heritage and residential growth occupying same landscape because careful choices had made space for both. The forgotten orchard remembered. The abandoned farm restored. The desperate widow transformed into confident farmer. All of it real, because someone had believed that what seemed impossible might simply be difficult, and difficult was worth attempting if the alternative was surrender. Meadowbrook Farm lived, and in its living carried forward Nathaniel Thornfield's faith that careful work today created harvests. Tomorrow harvests you might never see fully mature, but harvests that justified the planting nonetheless.